Okay, welcome to the chapter 6 lecture on religion. This will be the last chapter covered before exam 1. And again, exam 1 can cover either CNN Immigrant Nation, because I think that's the only video assignment you guys had before the exam, and anything in the text and these lectures from chapters 1 to 6. And so hopefully you've read chapter 6 by now. And again, this is just designed to expand upon some of the information in chapter 6. So, religion, right? That's the whole theme of chapter 6. It's a belief in or worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially, the idea of a personal God, right? And so it's a particular system of faith and worship, right? Specific rituals, specific prayers, right? And it's also the pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. So religion has, the capacity, and it does. We see it, globally, to impact people's behavior every single day, and that's largely because it's a set of values, that dictate that behavior and beliefs. And so, someone who practices religion, we call an adherent, right? And someone that ascribes to those set of ideals and maybe ways of living. But as far as the definition of religion, right, there's basic classifications, and there's monotheism, polytheism, animism, and panentheism. So monotheism, mono, right, belief in one God. Polytheism, poly, more than one, belief in many gods. Animism is the belief in inanimate objects that have spirits, and pantheism, sorry, is the belief that a single God, number of gods, or other form of you know constituents, that every part of the universe extends timelessly beyond it. And so we're first going to examine, how do we know where different religions exist? Well, just like the census, right? And if you remember, the census keeping track of some of those socioeconomic characteristics like income, education, age, sex, uh, you name it, right? Rent, vehicle ownership. There are also other databases out there specifically that track religion. So some of them are adherence.com, the Association of Statisticians of American Religious Bodies, and then the Pew Research Center, which I'm sure some of you have not only heard of, but probably have cited in some of your papers in school. But those databases keep track based on self-identification. So it's up to whoever they're surveying or interviewing to self-identify as a specific religion, and they don't measure how active that person is in practice. Right? So they're just saying, do you belong to a certain religion, or do you consider yourself to belong to a certain religion? But they're not, monitoring how much someone goes to church, someone prays in a mosque, right? How often they visit a synagogue, and so that can become problematic because we don't know, right, how many people actually believe and practice versus how many people just believe. So similar to organizing language families from chapter 5, we can also organize religion. It's not going to be in the tree shape that the languages were, but we can see how that organization has stemmed from Hertz, right? And so the four largest religions, the largest being Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, or 77% of the world's population. Now, again, this data is from about 2015, so we can expect all of these numbers to most likely increase. However, folk religion, right, and we talked about folk religion in chapter 4, and some of the physical barriers that prevent folk culture from spreading. And so 6% of the world's population has folk culture, right? And these are either Chinese traditional, primal indigenous, or African traditional languages. So 6% is a lot. So when we think about pop culture, maybe today, we also have to recognize 6% of the whole world still belongs to folk culture. Other religions, even Judaism and Sikhism, right? They're only 1%, and I think that statistic surprises a lot of people, because I think a lot of people assume that Judaism is a lot larger than it actually is. And so 6 other religions have between 1 to 10 million adherents. Some of them you may have heard: Jainism, Shinto, Zoroastrianism. Just as an example, Jainism is a sect of Buddhism, except It believes in not harming kind of any life or disturbing any kind of uh, natural life that you come in contact with. And so a lot of the especially the monks that practice Jainism, they usually walk with a broom in front of them to make sure they're not stepping on any bugs or anything like that. And so it's just the belief um, to respect all forms of life and the fact that you don't negatively impact it. And then also 16% now are unaffiliated, which means atheist or agnostic. So what does atheist mean? It's the belief that there's no God, right? Atheism saying, definitively no, there's not a God. And agnostic is saying could be, I don't know. When we try to organize it and just look at it numerically, we can see that Christianity is in fact the largest, but there's more unaffiliated people than the remaining three largest religions, which being Hinduism, Buddhism, and folk culture. So if we just look at a map to see where the most numerous religions by countries are, we can see that there's a lot of Christianity that's been dominated, and we'll talk about how that's happened. And the only most of the countries in the world are predominantly Christian, with the exception of North Africa and the Middle East, and then we see in Mongolia and Southeast Asia more Buddhism, and then India, obviously because it was a hearth for Hinduism. So within that, we have different types of religions. Yes, there's obviously different kinds: Islam, Christianity, Judaism, but within those, there's different subcategories, and we call some of them are universalizing religions, and those are the religions that seek converts. Right, you're not born into that religion; you've been converted into that, or either through your parents, converting you to that, and so it has a known origin and clear patterns of diffusion. And we'll talk about those clear patterns of diffusion in a second. Tend to be large, right? And examples are some of the largest religions. But then there's also ethnic religions, which don't seek converts and you're just born into it, right? Typically have unknown origins or a little bit of diffusions. Examples are Hinduism, which you may not have expected. Judaism, yes, you're born into that. Also Chinese folk and African animism. And so when we're talking about the different types of diffusion, what types of diffusion are we likely to see associated with each religion? Well, as we said, if we think about organizing religions similarly to language families, obviously there's going to be a lot less diversity within that. But for example, this is a map of the branches of Christianity in Europe. We can see where the Roman Catholic is in yellow. And then again, these are just branches within the same religion, right? So we had Indo-European as the main language trunk in the family, and then it extended up into branches, right? These are the branches that we're looking at right now: Roman Catholic, Protestant Orthodox, and even other religions in the area that are other subsects of Christianity or Islam, because we know that from looking at the previous map, North Africa is predominantly practices Islam. But how about when we take it down to the U.S. context, right? Look at Texas, just maybe a familiar example. Southern Texas, Roman Catholic, and then the rest of Texas is predominantly Southern Baptist. Do you think that's true? Again, this data is from 2010 here. So again, by most likely associated with the census. And what are some other popular non-denominational? What does that mean? I'll let you guys figure that one out. But if you can think about what state that is, then you may have an idea of what non-denominational means. Also, we talked about cartograms, right? And a cartogram displays a country's size based on the population, right? Here is a cartogram of Muslim adherents, but the same kind of deal, right? So India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indonesia have the largest Muslim adherents. In fact, Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the entire world. How about the distribution of the branches of Islam? Right, we can see the same kind of thing throughout the Middle East. And we know this isn't surprising, right? Because we saw the big families, right? Or the big branch, or the big trunks associated on this map, right? So overall, Christianity, Islam, and now when we're getting into the smaller subsects, it's not surprising that we see all these subsects in the same areas that are under the umbrella, right, of Islam. And how about Buddhism? Right, there's Mahayana Buddhism, Theravada, and they all have different hearths and different origins. and predominantly in Asia and Southeast Asia. So a little more on ethnic religions. And remember, we said ethnic religions you're born into. So the first recorded religion to kind of say, that there is only one God, right? It's to proclaim monotheism. And that's, obviously in direct contrast with previous thought on, polytheism, such as older religions. So 2/5, maybe this is surprising to you, 2/5 of people that practice Judaism live in the United States, and 2/5 live in Israel, meaning 80% of all people that practice Judaism or adhere to Judaism, right, either live in the US or Israel. And Christianity and Islam also find some of their roots in Judaism. However, animism, and obviously, again, that is the belief that inanimate objects are natural events, such as disasters or spirits have conscious life, have almost 100 million followers. So ethnic religions, right? If we just look at the distribution within Hinduism, right? Most are concentrated in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. But again, because they're ethnic religions and they're smaller, right, and follow that folk culture, it's not surprising that we see even slight variations, but within that same region, right? And that being, South Asia. So there's non-religion religions, right? And when we talked briefly about that, atheism, the belief that God does not exist, agnosticism, which is the belief that, we can't know whether God exists or not, could, it couldn't. And then there's secular humanism, which is the belief that humanity is capable of morality and self-fulfillment without belief in a God, right? So kind of just saying, the idea of just being a good person. So this is dealing now, key issue 2, where do religions have distinct distributions? We're going to talk about not only origins, but also how those religions have spread. And so the origins of Christianity, right, believe that the historic site started in Israel, or the religion started in Israel. And how about Islam? Muhammad's successors organized followers into armies to force the spread. And so while you see the force of spread, you should automatically associate that with hierarchical diffusion. However, and I'm not going to go through each of the origins, right? You can read that, but just to get an idea now, if we look at the diffusion of universalizing languages, and again, what's universalizing? They seek converts, right? They want to convert people to their religion, and you're not born into that religion. So Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam. And so the solid ovals are hearths, right? And then the different arrows that you see, the different shapes of arrows, are when they diffused, but not how they diffused, right? When they diffused. So if we look at the early diffusion of Christianity, right? And the color shades of yellow here are dictating how strong the diffusion of Christianity is by year. So in the darker, orange, light brown, I'm colorblind, so if that's not the color you're seeing, the one that says 200 AD, we can see that not as much are strongly Christian by this time, but by 600 AD, look at how that's diffused out. And you see, the St. Paul, one of the saints in Catholicism, right? The first journey, the Christian missionaries made, and where these kind of hierarchical diffusions were occurring at first. Now, Islam, right? The teal looking color by 1632, but by 750 AD, right, spreads all the way through North Africa, parts of Spain, and further into the Middle East. But the arrows here are military campaigns, so they're spread through force. Now, don't think that the early diffusion of Christianity was not also involved in hierarchical diffusion. It certainly was. Right? These are just two different conceptualizations of how religion diffuses, but both Christianity and both Islam were involved in hierarchical diffusion, right? Through power and most of the time force. And what about the movement of Christians, right? How does one country that's predominantly Christian, how does another country that had no religion before that, or not no religion, but this specific religion before that, become predominantly made up of Christians? And number one, yes, it's hierarchical diffusion, but number two, it's also contagious diffusion. And so again, if we remember that map going back at the top, let me pull it up quickly for you. Where is it? Okay, so again, these are just the main families, if you wish, right, of the four largest religions. And so North Africa and the Middle East, we can see predominantly Islam, and then the Americas and Northern Europe and Russia are predominantly Christian, right? And the reason I'm not going into more detail about Buddhism and Hinduism is because they are, number one, they're both smaller than Christianity and Islam, but because they're universalizing, and again, remember that they seek converts and you're not born into it, they all follow the same path of also hierarchical diffusion, which means conversion by force. Let me just try to find my place where we were. So I believe we were talking about the hierarchical diffusion of Islam, and also saying that yes, that does happen for Christianity too. But how about the religion of international migrants? So remember, we talked about people's movement and relocation diffusion and why it's important to track immigration or emigration, right? And remember the differences between those two very quickly: emigration, leaving from, and immigration, coming to, right? So an immigrant will say, I immigrated to the US and I emigrated from Spain, right? But the majority of international migrants are Christian. So of course then that promotes the ability for Christianity to be spread more when more people belong to it and are moving internationally, right? And the second largest being Islam. Statistic that you may not have thought, though, unaffiliated, right? And we can kind of see this in Northern Europe, where countries like Sweden and Norway, are over 80% agnostic or atheist. I'm just trying to pick out what we should expand on here. If we look at Roman Catholic hierarchy in the US, if you're not familiar with Catholicism, there's hierarchies within the religion. And so the red solid lines are a province, which you may expect, and those are governed, right? So all the churches in this case, and within this red line, or any of these red lines, is governed by an archbishop, which is one of the highest, positions in Catholicism that you can have, I think, alongside the Pope. Then, in usually major cities, right, you have an archdiocese, which is kind of the authority in the region, right? And then you have just a diocese, which is these green lines, and that's like so if you had to rank them, right, it would be archbishop, archdiocese, and then bishop. And they all do different stuff. The landscape in ethnic religion. So we talked about cultural landscapes, right? And so on the left, you're seeing that in India, how the disposal of the dead happens, right? A cremation followed by putting the burning body into the river. And then while Zoroastrianism prefer open exposure on the right. So your body is kind of just placed in an open burial site. Lastly, religious conflict I want to cover. So conflicts most likely to occur at a boundary between two religious groups, right? Jerusalem being one of the best examples we can see of this, right? And remember, we did cover Jerusalem and said that it's a multicultural area, and that you have different religions and different ethnicities living in close proximity to each other, and they have conflicting views. But you can even have conflicting views within a religion, right? It doesn't have to be just, between different religions. It can be within. So there were religious wars in Ireland. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that, right? A small faction chose to join the UK when Ireland became independent in 1937. 46% Protestant, 40% Roman Catholic. Roman Catholics have pretty much been discriminated and victimized, excluded from higher paying jobs and better schools. Belfast, right, the capital city, is highly segregated, and protests by Catholics began in the late 60s, and they kind of clashed violently with the Protestants. And so, if you guys know the IRA, if you're familiar with that, the Irish Republican Army, they were responsible for carrying out a lot of violent attacks against Roman Catholics during this time. Even in the Middle East, right? I know these are text heavy, so you don't have to read them all. I'm just trying to elaborate on the key finding here. So even religious wars in the Middle East within different sects, within Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, all three of these claim that the hearth of their religion is on the same land, and so you can imagine that different universalizing religions that claim the same hearth, right, can have conflict over the rights to that land and how it should be governed and what should be done with it and who has the right to live there, right? And we see that more evident anywhere right now than in Israel and Palestine. So after 1973, Palestinians emerged as Israel's principal opponent and challenging in the region. And so if we know about history, right, Israel was created in 1948, post World War II. And so Palestinians viewed themselves as the legitimate rulers of Israel. But the biggest obstacle to that is the status of Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem is a really key area for numerous reasons, as I've mentioned, but it's also the site of a lot of ethnic conflict, and sometimes it's social conflict and sometimes it's violent conflict, because it's the most sacred place for the two largest universalizing religions, right? And adherent Jews, right? The Muslims and Christians that live in Jerusalem, they just built over the top of the sacred site for Judaism. And so, of course, that causes conflict. Now, this is showing Palestinian land laws from 1947, right? A year before, the creation of Israel, and to the present day. So in 1947 on the left, we can see, let me try to get rid of this. Okay. In 1947 on the left, we can see Jewish settlements, as World War II is ending, as Jews are relocating from Europe into Israel. So Palestinians pretty much control the land. And you can see that where Jerusalem is here, Palestinians also control. So now, 1947, almost 1948, look at the land loss of Palestinian control compared to the Jewish settlements almost not even a year before. Fast forward now into the late 60s, Israelis, or the migrating Jews from Europe mostly, are taking Palestinian land. However, you see this border here still, Jerusalem belonging to Palestine. And now, in the present day, it is almost unidentifiable, right? Because what I'm not showing here, and which if you care to look this up, the Israeli government, right, hierarchically, has been sponsoring the demolition of Palestinian land. Also, adherents from other countries, right, such as the United States, Jewish followers from the U.S. are also claiming land in Israel, which is adding to the loss of Palestinian land in conflict. And I'm not sure, there's been no really solution offered by the UN or any international council that's been acceptable on both sides. So certainly, some people have proposed strategies, but the Israeli government and the Palestinians have extremely different views, right? Based off of their claim, the original claim to land. So a lot of the times when we see religious conflict, yes, it's over ideology differences, but always pay attention to the land in which that area has conflict, right? And the history behind that land, because more than not, the land is more valuable and viewed, right, as sacred in areas of violence, especially. And so what Jerusalem, looks like is pretty much this kind of, throughout the city, there's different fences segregating different religious sects, right? Or, separating Palestinians from Israel, right? So there's physical borders, right? And again, remember the folk culture and pop culture, these physical borders also prevent, people from interacting and culture from spreading. So this is not just, by design or just because to separate people. This also has a lot of other implications, right? Those social, uh, economic, political, physical, environmental implications, right? We use spatial thinking to think about everything here. So that's pretty much all I had for you today. Again, exam number 1 will focus on chapters 1 through 6, and then anything on the video or these lectures. So after you view this, and hopefully you've read all 6 chapters, I'll distribute the exam review sheet on Canvas. You guys can download it and then bring some kind of questions to the review, because if you don't ask questions in the review, I'm just going to end the session, because again, the exam review is for you, right? I'm not going to waste my time staring into a screen if no one's going to be asking any kind of questions. However, that being said, if you guys have questions, I'll be more than happy to spend as much time as it takes, answering them. So please come prepared for that, and good luck.